Greetings. Welcome to my podcast that features my book, Colonial American History Stories 1215 through 1664. This episode relates the story of Christopher Columbus. It is the last of three parts that begin with the elopement of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella and ends with Columbus's death and his postmortem wanderings. We join Columbus as he begins his second voyage to the New World. Greetings. Today I will discuss the beginning of Columbus's second voyage to the Caribbean in 1493. September the 24th, 1493, Columbus' second expedition begins. After Christopher Columbus returned from his first voyage, he had little trouble finding support for his second. Most believed he had found a shortcut to Asia. The promise of rich trade in silk, spices, and other exotic oriental wares beckoned. His second voyage began with 17 ships that carried 1,200 people. These were the first potential European settlers to attempt to plant colonies in Asia. The ships also brought the first European livestock to the New World, an assortment of horses, sheep, and cattle. The second voyage set off. Conflicting purposes. The Spanish monarchs tasked him in maintaining friendly relations with the native peoples. Unbeknownst to him, they did not intend to duplicate the Portuguese practice of slavery. The Portuguese had begun a profitable slave trade using the African colonies as a source. Columbus had been exposed to this system during his time in Portugal. He expected that the slave trade would form an important part of his revenue stream. Departure from the Canary Islands. After sailing from Cadiz on September the 24th, 1493, Columbus duplicated the route of his first voyage. He traveled first to the Canary Islands. After a brief stay, he departed on October the 13th, 1493. His passage was fast. November the 3rd, 1493, Columbus sights Dominica. On Sunday, November the 3rd, he sighted land and landed on an island he named Dominica. Greetings. In this episode, Christopher Columbus discovers the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. Christopher Columbus reached the Virgin Islands, St. Croix, on November the 14th, 1493, shortly after he reached the New World on his second voyage of discovery. He landed briefly on the island and his party found itself the target of arrows fired by the native Caribs. Columbus' party retreated to the ship and sailed first east, then west. On the 19th, he sighted the island we call Puerto Rico. Sailing along the south coast, he called the island San Juan Bautista after St. John the Baptist. He landed on this island and found the native Arawaks friendlier than the Caribs of St. Croix. He stayed only 2 days, claimed it for Spain, and sailed on to Hispaniola to visit the colony he had left a year earlier. The Spanish did not visit San Juan Bautista for another decade. Ponce de Leon visited the island and renamed it Puerto Rico. The city, founded in the harbor, received the name San Juan. On Christmas Day, 1492, the Santa Maria had lodged on a reef and wrecked offshore of the island Hispaniola. Christopher Columbus decided to dismantle the ship and use it to build a small fortress for the 39-man crew and leave them there. He named the settlement La Navidad. Columbus departed on January the 4th to search for Martin Alonso Pizon, captain of his other ship, the Nina, which had sailed off on its own. Columbus returned to Spain and convinced the Spanish monarchs to fund another voyage. He departed in late 1493 on this second voyage. On November the 3rd, 1493, Columbus returned to Hispaniola to find the fort burned and his crewmen missing. A search of the vicinity yielded several bodies in a nearby field. Later testimony from local natives revealed that the Spanish left behind became quarrelsome. They took native women as wives, angering the island's inhabitants. While on an expedition searching for gold, several natives killed the explorers. They then traveled to the fort, burned it, and forced the remaining Spanish defenders into the sea, where they drowned. Greetings. Welcome to the Time for United States History podcast. Today I will relate the end of Christopher Columbus' second voyage to the New World. Columbus returned to Hispaniola on November the 22nd, 1493, to find the colony he had left there destroyed and the men all dead. The settlers and the native tribe had quarreled. The natives attacked the settlement and killed the inhabitants. Upon arrival, Columbus immediately began building a city and more fortified places. He named the city La Isabella after the Queen. On February the 2nd, 1494, 12 of the ships left for Spain carrying gold, captives, and some parrots. He spent the summer exploring the coast of Cuba, concluding that it was part of the mainland of Cathay, or China. He had earlier decided that Hispaniola was the biblical land of Sheba. On June the 12th, 1494, he compelled his crew to swear that they had indeed reached Cathay. They did this, though many of the crew disagreed with his assertion. He returned to Hispaniola and spent the greater part of 1495 enforcing strict discipline among his men. He also attempted to conquer the native tribes on the island. His disciplinary methods were so harsh that some of his company deserted, seized some ships, and returned to Spain. He forced the native to pay a set amount of tribute in gold every 3 months. In return for the tribute, they had to display a copper token hung around their necks. If they had no token, he would have their hands cut off. Leaving his brother Bartholomew and Diego in charge of Hispaniola, he departed for his return to Spain. After over 2.5 years of exploring the Caribbean island, Columbus departed on March the 10th, 1496. He and his ships arrived in Cadiz, Spain on June the 11th. Upon his arrival, he immediately began lobbying for a third voyage. Greetings. In this episode, Christopher Columbus begins his third voyage to North America. During Columbus's second voyage to the New World, Spain had ratified the Treaty of Tordesillas on July the 2nd, 1494. The Treaty of Tordesillas had divided the New World between Spain and Portugal. It divided it along a line drawn from pole to pole that passed about 320 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Spanish-born Pope Alexander VI had issued a papal bull that established this line. The two countries agreed to this on June 7, 1494. Spain received the lands to west of the line, Portugal the lands to the east. The Spanish King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella commissioned Columbus to return for a third voyage. Part of this voyage was to discover the extent of their new possessions. On May the 30th, 1498, Columbus and his 6 ships departed. The ships carried provisions for the colony on Hispaniola, and part of their mission was to resupply the colony there. Once at sea, Columbus divided the fleet in half. 3 ships he sent to Hispaniola. The other 3 he would take south to explore the undiscovered lands. It was during this portion of the voyage that he discovered the principle of compass variation. This variation is the difference between the geographic north and magnetic north. It had created problems for navigation in the past. The ships had made slow progress at first. Then they hit a patch of weather that had little wind and high temperatures. Sailors called this the doldrums, and they stranded ships for days in high heat with little wind to fill their sails. When they finally managed to clear the doldrums, they were low on water. Greetings. Today's episode relates Columbus's third voyage, which ended in his being sent back to Spain in chains. After parting Spain on May the 30th, 1498, the crew sighted an island on July 31st that they named Trinidad, believing that its 3 hills represented the Holy Trinity. Here they restocked their dwindling water supply. From Trinidad, they could see another landmass in the distance. On August 1st, 1498, Columbus entered the Gulf of Paria in Venezuela. He would explore the mouth of a huge river they named the Orinoco on August 1st, 1498. This is one of the largest rivers in South America at 1,330 miles long. Columbus explored the delta region of this river until August the 12th. He determined that the huge volume of water delivered by this river meant that the land that he was looking at was part of a huge continent. At this point in the exploration, Columbus became ill and broke off the explorations to return to Hispaniola. On the route back to Hispaniola, his flotilla passed Margarita Island on August the 16th, 1498. This mountain tropical island is northeast Venezuela in the Caribbean Sea. The Huarques tribe inhabited the island at the time of Columbus' arrival. The island boasts an average of 330 days of sun per year with moderate temperatures and ideal beaches. The island also has an abundance of pearls, of which the natives traded 3 bags to Columbus. After exploring the area, Columbus' illness grew worse, so he set course to return to the colony at Hispaniola. They returned to Hispaniola on August the 19th, almost 2 years since Columbus had left. The colonists were not happy to see him return, as he had proved a poor governor. There were numerous disputes among the colonists, and they were in near mutiny. Columbus had a few of them hanged, and a tenuous peace resumed. The colonists then sent a delegation to complain to the king. The king responded by sending a Spanish Chief Justice, Francisco de Bobadilla, to investigate. Bobadilla's powers superseded Columbus's, and he ruled against him in the disputes. He had Bartholomew, who had been governor, Diego, and Christopher Columbus all placed in chains. He sent them back to Spain on the ship La Horta. The ship arrived in Spain in late October 1500. The king and queen had Columbus released upon his return. 2 years later, they authorized his fourth and final voyage. Greetings. This episode relates the beginning of Columbus's disastrous fourth and final voyage to the New World. Christopher Columbus left Cadiz, Spain on May the 9th, 1502, for what would be his final voyage. Columbus had served as governor of Hispaniola, a post for which he was poorly suited. He was tyrannical, and his term was marked by inefficiency. His list of enemies grew, and eventually they had him arrested and sent back to Spain in chains in 1500. Queen Isabella freed him when she learned of his predicament. His voyage did not produce the gold and riches they expected. Combined with his failed tenure as governor, the king and queen had lost confidence in Columbus. Nevertheless, they outfitted him with another set of ships, crew, and supplies for another voyage. He would have 4 ships. His stepbrother Bartholomew, Diego Mendez, and his 13-year-old son Ferdinand accompanied him. The king and queen forbade him to visit Hispaniola because of his poor reputation there. On the last stage of his voyage, the ships encountered a hurricane. He sailed on to Hispaniola to find shelter in the bay. He warned the authorities about the hurricane. The first of the treasure fleets that would soon enrich Spain was getting ready to depart. Columbus entreated the governor to delay the fleet. Not only did the governor ignore his warning, he denied him entry and sent him off to shelter in another port. Columbus had placed some of his possessions on one of the ships to carry back to Spain. The 28-ship fleet encountered the hurricane, which sank all the ships but 4. 3 made it back to Hispaniola, while the one carrying Columbus's possessions made it back to Spain. Most of Columbus's enemies perished in the storm. Battered and damaged by the storm, Columbus sailed on and anchored near an island off the coast of Honduras. While there, they made repairs to the ships and took on supplies. While there, Columbus explored portions of Central America. The Spanish had not encountered any of the great Central and South American native civilizations yet. The Maya, Aztec, and Inca had not yet encountered Spanish. While exploring, Columbus discovered a wide canoe like the Mayan used for trade. The canoe contained copper tools, wood, and flint swords, textiles, and a beer-like beverage. It also contained what Columbus thought were some type of almonds. He noted that the Maya apparently held these in great esteem because if they dropped one, they would go to great pains to retrieve it. These were apparently cacao beans, the source of chocolate. For whatever reason, Columbus did not choose to investigate further. After exploring the Central American region that is now Nicaragua, Honduras, and Costa Rica, Columbus arrived at Almirante Bay, now Panama. From natives in the region, he learned of an ocean to the west that appeared to convince him that he had reached the Far East. Columbus continued his explorations in the area and, beset by storms, returned to Panama. There he built a garrison on the banks of Rio Bilane, took 2 of his ships upriver to explore, but natives attacked, driving him back to the garrison. The natives attacked this also, so Columbus rescued his men and departed. He continued sailing south into disaster. Greetings. In this episode, Christopher Columbus has to beach his ships and tear them apart to provide shelter for his crew. Columbus sailed past the coasts of Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama, encountering native cultures along the way. As they sailed, they discovered their ships had a severe infestation of shipworms. The worms created holes in the ship's hulls, making them unseaworthy. With a great deal of reluctance, Columbus set sail for Santo Domingo. They made it as far as Jamaica and beached the ships on June the 25th, 1503. They tore the ships apart to make shelters and made an uneasy peace with the natives. Some of the natives paddled a canoe to Hispaniola to inform the governor of Columbus's plight. Personal animosity and a lack of resources delayed the help for over a year. Rescue came finally on June the 29th, 1504. Columbus and his surviving crew members returned to Saludar de Barcarama Castile on November the 7th, 1504. Upon his arrival in Spain, he learned that Queen Isabella was on her deathbed. After her death, on November the 26th, 1504, his main advocate was gone. There would be no more voyage of discovery for him. Columbus' initial contract with the king and queen in 1492 guaranteed him a tenth of the gold from Hispaniola supposedly assured his wealth. It was his luck that the fleet carrying his possessions from Hispaniola was struck by a hurricane, and the only ship that survived was the one carrying his possessions. His son Diego had achieved a position on the Spanish court and had some influence there. Columbus lived in stylish quarters in Seville and led a comfortable lifestyle. He did suffer from reactive arthritis, possibly contracted by the ill conditions of his shipwreck, and considered himself shortchanged by the events. His continual requests for an audience with King Ferdinand were denied. He refused to believe that he had found a new world, instead convinced that he had been in Asia. Greetings. Today you will learn of Christopher Columbus' death and how his body traveled almost as much as it did while he was alive. May the 20th, 1506, Christopher Columbus died. Christopher Columbus had returned from his fourth and final voyage on November the 7th, 1504. His health was poor. The bad food and deplorable living conditions during his voyages and the shipwreck had taken its toll. His eyesight was weak, and he suffered from painful bouts of arthritis or gout. He went to Seville to await an audience with the king and queen. The queen was on her deathbed and died on November the 26th, 1504. Thus he had lost his best advocate. The Spanish crown refused to pay him the 10% commission on profits derived from the new lands because they felt he had forfeited when the crown relieved him of the position of governor. Columbus had expected to receive at least a government post of some sort in appreciation for his accomplishment. King Ferdinand had no intention of giving him a post and adamantly refused to see him. Thus Columbus profited little from his discoveries. He lived in poverty in Seville, waiting for word from the king. The king did eventually grant him one brief interview. During that moment, the king made no promises of anything. During the time he had left, he still believed he had found a route to China. He did not know that he had found an entirely new world. Thus, when he died on May the 20th, 1506, the discoverer of a new world that would generate wealth beyond measure for Spain would die a disappointed and impoverished man. Columbus' nomadic returns. After his demise, his remains wandered almost as much as he did when alive. After his death, the Valladolid Friary was the repository of his body. From there, his bones went to the Carthusian monastery in Las Cuervas in Seville, to his family's mausoleum. When his son Diego died, his will stipulated that his father's remains and his own were to be laid together in the Cathedral of Santo Domingo in Hispaniola. Thus, this was to satisfy his father's request that his body be buried in his first discovery, Hispaniola. Spain ceded Hispaniola to France in 1697, and the remains went to Cuba to reside in Havana in 1795. They were returned to Seville in 1898. However, workers discovered a set of bones in the Cathedral of Santo Domingo in 1877 that bore markings that indicated they were the ones that belonged to Christopher Columbus. Authorities interred these at Columbus's lighthouse in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. Genetic DNA comparisons to the bones authorities know are Columbus's brother have determined that Spain has the right bones. The testing was completed in 2006. That does not mean that the bones in Santo Domingo are not his. Since the body has been moved several times, it is possible that they have become mixed with others, with some in the New World and some in Spain. Spanish authorities are awaiting permission to test the DNA on the ones in Santo Domingo. Find out more about the colonial history of the United States by purchasing the book Colonial American History Stories 1215 through 1664. The book is a timeline of events from Christopher Columbus to 1664. You can find it on my website, www.mossyfeetbooks.com, on the Timeline of United States History category. Just scroll down to the categories, click on that one, and you'll find the book. There are links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, and other online booksellers. You may choose to purchase the book in ebook or softbound versions. An audiobook version is available on Google Play. At the conclusion of this series, I will compile the episodes into another audiobook. This audiobook will be available on Audible, Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble, as well as many other audiobook sellers. You can find this podcast on Apple, iHeart, Radio, Amazon Music, TuneIn, and many other podcast platforms. I publish a video version on YouTube and Rumble. In the next series, we learn about the voyage of John Cabot and the English claims to the New World. You can also order these books direct from me, the author, on the webpage. If you wish me to sign the book, just send me an email to mossyfeetbooks.com requesting a signed book and instructions on how you want me to address it. Note, if you send me an email, I will add you to my contact list. Readers on the list will receive an email from me announcing when I publish a new book. If you do not want me to add you to the list, tell me and I will not add you. Listeners to the podcast that want email notification of my new releases can just send me an email requesting addition to the list. You can choose to have your name removed at any time. If you browse the website, you will find dozens of sample chapters, one for each of my books. Residents of Southeast Indiana can find my books at the Walnut Street Variety Shop at 111 East George Street, Batesville, Indiana. Their phone number is 812-932-2666. And you can pick up books there, or I do have catalogs in there. If there's a book that you'd like to have, you can just order it and then I can deliver it to that store. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and thank you for listening.